Hello again, Steve here, and I wanted to talk a little bit about what I've heard recently is that a carbon tax is going to be imposed on Saskatchewan in a few days, around the 1st of April or so. And this is of course, it's a travesty of justice, and of course, it's a travesty of logic, and of course, it's a complete indictment on the socialist indoctrination camps known as public schools. Because why would this happen? Why do we have to tax arguably the most important compound in the known universe, CO2? I mean, CO2 is at historically low levels. It is what grows plants. Plants are good, aren't they? And I could argue, or some people could argue, that we should actually be producing more CO2. But this is, and it's also an indictment on those who claim to care, who run politics. I mean, I don't know much about the Premier of Saskatchewan, Scott Moe, but he should really, as far as I understand it, the federal government has no constitutional grounds to impose this on Saskatchewan. None whatsoever. But of course, I would guess that Trudeau doesn't care anything about constitutions. I mean, he's a tyrant like the rest of them. I mean, one of his great friends apparently are the Castros. So that what more do we need to know? And potentially is a Castro, but that's called a conspiracy theory, of course, isn't it? But whatever. And but I mean, Scott Moe, I don't know why they even bother. Like, I suspect what's happened is that Trudeau has offered every non-thinking individual in Saskatchewan a paycheck if their government supposedly signs on to this nonsense. The thing is, or doesn't basically tell Trudeau to pound sand, because that's all they should do. If they're going to say anything to Trudeau, it should just be pound sand. It's non-constitutional, ain't happening. Why do they have to bother spending money that is more money that's extorted out of people to go and fight this in court? Why bother? If it's unconstitutional, it's unconstitutional. To hell with it. Don't bother with it. Just forget about it. Let Trudeau yammer on about what he wants. Sure. Some people would say, the legal scholars, of course, because they're in it for the money, they're going to say, oh, this is a breakdown of authority and blah, blah, blah. No, it's not. If it's unconstitutional, it's unconstitutional. If it clearly says that you're dealing with, that the federal government is meddling in provincial areas of jurisdiction or whatever, then I don't know why they even have to reply. Just forget about it. Don't. So I think you've fallen down on that one, Scott Moe, whatever it is. But I once again, I've been talking about this for a long time, and I know some really, really smart people. I know a guy out in Vancouver who's completely convinced that the Vancouver harbor is rising in sea level. And I've asked him. He says he's got a sailboat, and I said, hey, have you noticed any change on your dock? Well, no, of course not, because it's not that measurable. Well, I said, well, why are you so convinced then? Because he's convinced about global warming and how the waterfront's going to flood and all this sort of stuff. Because he's bought into it. And who was it? This Yuri Benznamov or whatever. He was this KGB guy who defected back in the 70s, I believe, or the 60s or whatever. But he did an interview in the 80s about the communist takeover and how people become demoralized. They become demoralized because everything's turned upside down, and there's all kinds of propaganda, and even smart people buy into this nonsense. He said that people can be taught to believe complete lies and complete fabrications, and no amount of information, no amount of logic, no amount of argument, none of it will convince them. He said the only thing that'll convince them is a swift kick in the ass or a kick in the balls. That's where reality comes back to them, kind of thing. They got to get a hard knock on the head in terms of, I don't mean necessarily actually, but in a proverbial sense, people have got to see reality for what it is. And the idea that CO2 is somehow a pollutant is how that's so widely believed is, to me, such evidence that people have just lost their ability to think. Lost their ability to think. That'd be like saying air is a pollution. You can't breathe air anymore because air is such a pollution, now we, the grand benevolent state, have got to charge you for breathing air that might harm you. You know? And even if CO2 was harmful for people to breathe it, well, if there was actual freedom, people would, I don't know, they would get masks, they put masks on, or they would buy bottled air or something like that. Why is it that we need, Big Brother Trudeau looking after everybody? What does he know? What has he ever done? Where's his infinite wisdom coming from? I don't think he's ever held down a full-time job in his entire life, let alone run anything. No, he's been placed in there with an agenda to put these in. These people who implement these taxes and so on, they don't give a damn about the environment. They can't possibly, if they somehow go on parading that CO2 is a pollutant. Maybe I've got all this wrong. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Show me the way. Show me the way to this enlightened, nirvana of no CO2 in the air, or low CO2 in the air. I don't know. I haven't seen a path there yet. But I think it's a shame, and I think it's an indictment on Scott Moe for even entertaining this nonsense. Just say, hey, you know what? In case you didn't realize, it's unconstitutional what you're trying to do, so we're going to ignore it. And we're not going to enforce anything here. None whatsoever. So go pound sand. That's it. Done. And, if you want to rewrite the Constitution, then go to work and get all the other provinces to sign on to it. Good luck with that. You're not very popular, by the way, Mr. Trudeau. Good luck with getting everybody to sign on to it. But no, I think this is just a ploy to try to ram something through before the election, because he's a little bit worried. So what he's going to do, he's going to impose this. This Scott Moe is probably not going to, is going to let it fly, is going to allow it, so that allows some precedence. And then he's going to send out a few checks to everybody to buy their votes. That's all it is. I remember, like, the PRI down in Mexico, the main socialist party that ran that place into the ground for, 80 years or whatever it was. I asked my my wife once, she's from there, how is it that the PRI is able to maintain so much power all this time? Well, she said all they do is they have a table of sandwiches and Coca-Cola at the polling station. And if you vote for them, it's una coca y un sandwich. Para ti. That's what it is. It's you show up to vote and we'll give you a Coca-Cola and a sandwich. That's the price to vote. And of course, if that's not corruption, what is? It's literally buying votes. And that's what this Mr. Compadre with the Castros is going to do here. He's going to send out checks so that everybody's so happy to be paying their extra 5 or 10 cents a liter of gas for this wonderful carbon tax, which is just one more regulation towards nirvana here on Earth, paradise on Earth. Let's see how well that works out. In the meantime, mind you, south of the border, they're not bothering with it. And, as I predicted way back in the day when everybody was, oh, Trump just won, we're going to have a massive crowd of people storming across the border from the USA. Never happened. I messaged back to some of these people, no, it's going to be going the other way, because that's where the jobs are probably going to be, And turning out, I was talking to my brother the other day. He works in oil and gas in Alberta sometimes and stuff like that. And he was saying that now it's gotten so bad that for Alberta, that you can get an oil well up and operating 5 times faster in the States now than you can in Canada. You can in Alberta of all places. And so how is that competitive? If you're going to be an investor in the oil and gas industry, where are you going to go? Right? The choice is clear. So, and you don't have to pay any carbon taxes. Carbon taxes in Alberta even, right? It's crazy. For the longest time, gas was cheaper there. Now it's cheaper here, but come Monday or whatever it is, it's going to be back up again. So here, because of this carbon tax, which Scott Moe apparently has not opposed. Or maybe he's opposed it, but he doesn't even have to oppose it. He can just say, forget about it. We're not going to bother with it here. Bloviate all you want, Trudeau, but we're not going to bother. So I guess what's the message? I try to have a message in each one of these little comments that I have online. And I guess the comment here is just to think, right? And and not to be one of these people who just, in spite of the evidence, believes, right? Look at things. Look around and realize that a good chunk of the air that we breathe is CO2. Look at the historical charts. We're historically low in the history of the Earth in terms of CO2. And also, if you do the research, as far as I know, I could be wrong on this, the amount that actually mankind is producing is relatively low. And there's evidence that other pollutants, maybe air conditioning, freon and whatever, could be harmful to the environment. But CO2, I don't get it, especially if we're relatively low in the history. Because after all, there's a balancing out, right? Because the more CO2 is in the environment, the more lush the vegetation grows. The more lush the vegetation grows, the more CO2 it sucks out of the environment and the more oxygen it puts in. It's like, high CO2, a massive amount of CO2 consumption. When you get massive amount of CO2 consumption, over time, the CO2 drops back down again. So much of this stuff has been done through computer modeling. And computer modeling, as far as I know, once again, has never proven to be accurate. There's always this, here's the thing, there's always some sort of an apocalypse coming, that the control freaks of the world, you go back as far as we want, there's always an apocalypse on the horizon. And the apocalypse right now is this, it was called global warming a few years ago, but now they realize that, oops, that might not be happening, so let's just call it climate change. So if it gets colder, if it gets warmer, if it starts raining more, whatever it does, we can just blame it on big bad industry, and yay, let's have more carbon taxes, right? It's all just a scam, a complete scam to suck money out of dumbed down people who've gone to public school, government schools. I can remember, I'm old enough to remember, I'm not that old, but I can remember back in the 70s, there was this huge train of tractor trailers going across Canada, just stopping at all the different schools to tell us all that there was, because there was no internet back there in the 70s, of course, but it was to tell us all that an ice age was coming. So we better stop, using more than 3 or 4 squares of toilet paper or some bullshit like this. We had to conserve, and not use very much of the Earth's resources because all the fish were being killed because of acid rain and blah, blah, blah. And they had charts of where we lived and how high the snow was going to be and how high the ice was going to be and so on. Well, how did that work out? Not very well, right? So then they switched it eventually to global warming, and of course, as worldwide, when you measure it the whole width, across the world, some places are getting warmer, some places are getting colder. Surprise, surprise. And then 10 years later, it switches around. Antarctica, you don't hear much about that. It's actually the ice shelves are growing there. It was funny. A bunch of these hippie types, these environmentalists, went down to try to find the house where the Australian expedition went into the South Pole back in a little over 100 years ago. There's still a cabin there. Apparently it was covered with snow probably by now. But at the time, you could sail up pretty much to the cabin. And now apparently it's like 20 miles that you got to dock your ship on the ice shelves way out and snowmobile in to get to it. Anyways, these guys went down there and their ship got stuck in ice. And they had to get helivaced out or whatever. And of course they kept it quiet because they were going down there to save the world from global warming, and they got their ship frozen in. Like, it's way bigger ice shelves than back then, and yet they're screaming about global warming. Well, no, it's a bunch of nonsense, I think. I don't know for sure, but this can only happen. This nonsense can only happen when you have really dumbed down people who are on the take, basically, who are willing to take a check for a couple of $100 once in a while so that the people who produce will pay in, because everybody gets to vote, which is the scam of democracy. And then you have people like Scott Moe who march the march about, we're going to stand up to Justin Trudeau, blah, blah, blah. Meanwhile, what the hell have you done? Here comes a carbon tax. And apparently you're spending a bunch more money in court trying to challenge it. Why bother challenging it? If it's unconstitutional, to hell with challenging it. How about just give them the middle finger and tell them to go pound sand, right? Oh no, but you got to keep all this political decorum up. because, of course, Justin Trudeau has this title of honorable or something. No, he's not honorable. Guy's a dirtbag. Never held a job in his life. Deserving of no respect whatsoever. So anyways, once again, if we learn how to think, this stuff doesn't, it'll fly past us as we'll recognize it right away for what it is. Another shakedown. That's all it is. Steve here again. Great talking. Talk again soon. Bye for now.